Well, welcome to CCMA's webinar on People Not Problems, Accompaniment and Sexuality with Anna Carter. And Anna Carter is the founder of Eden Invitation, a movement for young adult Catholics experience same-sex desires and gender discordance. Through community and conversation, Eden Invitation forms and empowers empowers for mature Christian discipleship. Anna earned her undergraduate degrees in theology and catechetics from the Franciscan University of Steubenville, following which she serves as a net missionary, high school teacher, and campus minister. And now, through writing, speaking, and relational ministry, Anna proclaims that there is abundant life in the midst of our longings. So, welcome, Anna, on behalf of CCMA, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all of you who are here, giving up some of your hard-earned free time, or maybe it's not so free. Well, I guess maybe not so free for the students. They're in the middle of finals. But yeah, thanks again for being here. And just a quick warning here. I just want to like kind of dissuade this, nip this in the bud. If you're here hoping for like a top 10 tips or a silver bullet perfect answer for handling a complex situation within your ministry, I regret to inform you this is probably not the webinar for you. I think sometimes it seems like a lot of our, whether it's pastoral advice or some of these pastoral presentations, I think can be easy sometimes to have a vibe, a sense of otherness, right? How we, in quotes, help them. But hello, I am one of them. Experiencing same-sex desires within the church is part of my own story. And in a lot of ways, the ministry that I do with Eden Invitation it's a personal approach, both an approach to individual persons, but also personal in that it comes out of my own heart. It comes out of the hearts of those who connect with us. Our work, our ministry focus is really coming from the desires, the requests, the direct needs that the community is voicing. So I'm going to talk about some principles. I'm going to get practical, hopefully for you all. I'm going to take some of your questions. But before we launch into all of that, I like to get personal for a few minutes. I want to share just some of my own story with you. I don't know, how many folks you've interacted with in your own life or in your own ministry who this is part of their story. I'm assuming by now it's at least a few, especially if you're tuning in today. But if you'll allow me for just a few minutes to share a little bit about myself. So let's get started, right? So here we go. The photo on the left is the only real photo you'll see in this presentation. The rest are stock photos. That's me in middle school, very much a tomboy, tree climber. Just loved the outdoors, always felt a little different. From my peers, from the typical standards of femininity that were present in the late 90s, early 2000s, during which I was coming of age. And ever since I was a kid, I was always really drawn to women. I didn't put a name on it, I didn't put a label on it. I just knew it was always really important to me to have a best friend. There always needed to be one other girl who I could share my deepest secrets with, and I was really present to. And as I got into middle school and early high school, realized that some of the ways that some of my friends were talking about, like the football players or the cute guy that played guitar, that's something that was going on in my mind too. But for some of the girls, I didn't really know what to do with that. And so I think, like many young people encountering something they don't know how to deal with, they ignore it, right? You just kind of tuck it away, because we all know those big questions of our lives always answer themselves if we just ignore them, right? But that was me. I was also really involved in church, very involved. We had some great youth ministry programs where I grew up. and had the opportunity to go on good retreats. One particular retreat had a really powerful encounter with Christ in adoration, and just knew that the church was where I wanted to be. That was it. I just knew I wanted to follow Christ. I knew that I was a daughter of God. This was going to be it, right? This is going to be my life. So, I got involved in ministry where I learned, or I got involved in some of these ministries, and went off to a good college to learn more about theology. And I learned a lot about prayer, about taking time apart with the Lord, encountering him in a deeply personal way. I had opportunities of good community, good friendships that I could share, aspects of my life with. And I also had a lot of great hope that God would make something beautiful out of my life. One of the things I thought he would make beautiful out of my life was that at my great Catholic college, I would meet a 6'4" lumberjack, and all these feelings would just disappear in the face of the magnificence of the lumberjack. Fortunately, or maybe fortunately, God has good plans, right? That did not happen. There were no lumberjacks. What I didn't expect, I kind of thought the deeper I went into the church, the more that these desires would maybe just go away, the more that I did my work, this would sort of disappear. But what I ended up finding was, I didn't really know how to talk about what I was feeling. I didn't really know how to deal with it. So I just kind of tucked it away. I tucked it away. I compartmentalized. Sometimes I'd take it out of the box and look at it and then pretty hastily shove it right back on the shelf, because it was kind of scary. There were questions in there that I didn't know how to answer. I also find myself, in the absence of lumberjacks, just finding myself kind of falling time after time for female friends in my life. For me, this took the form of just some unhealthy dependent friendships, some of which got pretty intense. And I just found myself kind of in this cycle over and over again, and kind of going through these periods where I'd be like, okay, God, what the heck? What do I do with this? And just feeling very lonely and very isolated. Again, when all this was occurring in my own life, this was kind of in the early 2000s. And if this was even talked about in the church, it was typically in the context of, the sexual abuse scandals that had occurred, right? And we heard a lot about, homosexuality talked about, but in a very particular way, very particular context that made it, to be honest, quite kind of frightening for me to share openly. Because I didn't want to be associated with some of the scandals that were going on in the church. I didn't want people to think that about me. I didn't really know what to do. Eventually I got to a point where one of the friendships was just going in a direction that I knew was not compatible with what I knew about the faith, with what I knew about God's design for human sexuality. And I had another come to Jesus moment, one of many throughout my life, where I needed to really square with okay, God, what does this mean? What does this mean for my life? I can't keep shoving this in a box. I can't keep getting into these same cycles. I need to be honest. I need to be honest with you. I need to be honest with people around me. So that's what I did. I was honest with the Lord in prayer. I got real with him in those places. I started telling the truth of what I was feeling and what I was dealing with to some trusted friends, and found them very, very receptive, found some real solidarity with other people that were also looking for vulnerability and mutual support in their own stuff, right? Which maybe it wasn't the same as mine. But we all knew that we weren't perfect, and we were gonna talk honestly about those things. And I started looking for concrete ways to really serve and to give of myself. Got involved in ministry, also just really kind of tapped into and pursued different hobbies that I kind of let fall to the wayside. And yes, this is the same slide. This isn't a mistake. Because I think one of the things that I needed to recognize was that some of these principles, some of these things that I kind of added on to my life of faith after my initial conversion, were things that I really needed to integrate into how I saw myself, to how I saw the world. But again, like, these things didn't necessarily confront my particular questions. They didn't necessarily create spaces where I could puzzle things out with others who shared my experiences. And so, over the past 10 years, like, kind of looking out at the blogosphere and all of the different voices, I noticed that really the loudest voices out there didn't seem to resonate with me. They didn't really seem to resonate with me. And I want to take a look at some of those approaches for just a few minutes, only because I think they kind of continue to dominate the conversation today. And I think they tend to be ways that we sort of feel obligated to move. There's kind of two different approaches that I want to talk about within two different ways of kind of approaching this maybe as problems sometimes. And just kind of a quick disclaimer, I'm not implying, as I'm about to share some of these other approaches, you might, a particular like writer or figure or organization that might come to mind. I am not speaking specifically to any particular individual or group. I'm not implying that anybody is impersonal. But these observations I'm going to share here in the next few minutes are really based on just kind of a wide swath of research, kind of a general sense that I sometimes have picked up, and also too, like how some people we worked with have kind of picked up as well. And also how I've reacted to them internally, and how people that we worked with have sometimes reacted to them internally. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes our pastoral approaches tend to fall into two distinct attitude spheres, kind of two different approaches, two different views of a problem. I'm going to call them here the philosophical apologetic and the minority embrace. So here we go. So sometimes I think when we look out at pastoral approaches, one of the ones that we can see is this kind of emphasis on the philosophical apologetic, right? There tends to be, as we're kind of planning how to interact with people, what to say, what to do, there can be a focus, an intense focus on like articulating the ends of the sexual act, right? What's the purpose of sexual union, as unitive and procreative, and also the desire to kind of combat identity politics. So the approach is really focused on make sure we can explain why the church teaches what it does in the face of an increasingly hostile culture. And there's a value to this, right? There's a value to clearly articulating moral principles, right? To recognizing and naming, like, okay, right, sitting against one's body, the bodies of others, placing our self-worth in anything other than God, the Father, is problematic, right? These are rightly areas of focus, and we absolutely need to be expounding, right, on the church's moral teaching. We need to be making these distinctions between the soul's faculties, right? The passions we're experiencing and the choices that we make, right? We need to be emphasizing that it isn't the desires or past decisions that define a person. Sometimes here we can see there's kind of this reaction to the problem of personal sexual sin. Right, the focus is on offering logical arguments for why particular behaviors are sinful, for the no, right? It's kind of an apologetic of why no. But at least when I encounter this, it can leave sometimes individual people, right, wondering, what's my yes? Right, what is my life going to look like? Because while it's important, again, to single these things out and to be able to explain and articulate them, the truth is, like, this experience of same-sex desires affects a lot of the aspects of my life and the lives of other people, right? There's inner questions of shame, disclosure, what does entering into healthy, holy friendships with people of the same sex look like? The family drama component, especially in areas of disclosure. Vocational questions, right? Will some form of religious life accept me? If I'm on the sexuality spectrum, should I get married? What even is the single life anyway, right? Talk about an under-examined aspect of our pastoral theology, right? The single life. And so sometimes if we're just kind of honing in on these areas, it can leave this whole swath of broader life a bit untouched. I think one of the other approaches we also see is what I'm calling the minority embrace. here the focus, I think, tends to be on the affirmation of personal experience, right? Kind of the wide variety of what people are experiencing. Also, a recognition of the LGBT community as a vulnerable minority, in which there's a need for some reparation for past injustices. And so kind of the approach here can be affirming the person and their experiences again, and kind of standing with this minority community. And there's a value, right? There's an obvious value to listening, to hearing what people have to say, to encountering the full, broader texture of their lives, the context in which these desires are being experienced. There's also value in acknowledging some of the human cost of these previous approaches, right? If you look at the history of our country, just, I mean, even from kind of a political, cultural standpoint, right? There's obvious injustices that have occurred throughout recent history towards people with same-sex desires. And there's kind of a reaction here to sin as well, right? To kind of this problem of like Pharisaical social sin, and saying, wait a minute, can we really be standing up on this pedestal, nitpicking what other people are experiencing, when we ourselves are imperfect, right? So there's kind of this sense of a reaction here. The focus on remedying maybe the harsh judgments of the past, both cultural and ecclesial settings. However, sometimes I think we can note with this approach that in our rush to defend the minority writ large, there can sometimes appear to be a neglect of the gospel call to holiness, like a full surrender to God the Father, to the will of the Father as it's revealed in Scripture and tradition. And if there's an avoidance of frank conversations about, God's intention, the design for the human person, sometimes it can be hard to tell if this approach really believes that God's plan for sexuality is good news that can bring abundant life. And I think most of us probably relate to one of these approaches over the other. But I would also guess that we all experience this tension. It's probably a big motivating factor in bringing you here today. And I'm sorry, I don't have a perfect resolution to this tension. But I wanted to name it. Because I think this is something that we experience in our ministry as we're kind of plotting our pastoral trajectories. And again, I think we can see approaches that tend to lean more one way than the other. But I think one of the things that these approaches have in common is that at their heart, they realize the same problem. I think they both recognize the problem of the fallenness of human nature. What do we do with sin? What do we do with the way that our woundedness affects the way that we interact with the world? How can we reconcile these things within ourselves? And I think it's this question that I personally wrestled with a lot in confronting these desires within myself. The quote that you can see on the screen here is from the founder of L'Arche, Jean Vanier, and he actually just passed away a couple of weeks ago. So we can pray for him, for the repose of his soul, and hopefully we can be asking for his intercession soon one of these days. He's a very holy man. One of his books, he's written a lot of different texts. One of his books is on coming together as broken human beings in healthy, holy, functioning community. The book is called Community and Growth. And in that text, he had this to say about human woundedness. He wrote, "The wound in all of us, in which we are trying to flee, can become the place of meeting with God and with brothers and sisters. It can become the place of ecstasy and of the eternal wedding feast. The loneliness and the feelings of inferiority, which we are running away from, become the place of liberation and salvation." So how do we respond? How do we respond to wounded persons? And like Jean Vanier and 2,000 years of church teaching and our own common sense says, we're all wounded. How do we respond to wounded persons in a way that calls them and us to dynamic life in Christ? I'm sure we all recognize this painting. It's Caravaggio's take on a reading that we actually just heard. It was in the second Sunday of Easter, Divine Mercy Sunday, in which Thomas is encountering the risen and wounded Christ. We've diagnosed the wound that these acts and desires aren't wounded. They aren't part of our fallen nature. Maybe they're just differently ordered. Then our work here can also be done, right? Because we can absolve the idea of sin here once and for all, accept each other's differences, be on our way. There's no wound to worry about in the first place. I think, in the words of St. Paul, that Christ himself shows us a still more excellent way. Personally, I'm inclined to agree with Jean Vanier and all the other spiritual theologians who speak of the possibility of acknowledgement and encounter precisely in our wounds. That somehow the wound in all of us, in which we are all trying to flee, can become the place of meeting with God and with brothers and sisters. That somehow mysteriously our wounds can become the place of ecstasy and of the eternal wedding feast. And with the loneliness, the feelings of inferiority, whatever else we carry that we're trying to run away from, can actually become the place of liberation and salvation. You'll find this quote at the bottom of all of our emails here at Eden Invitation. In a lot of ways, I think it's the heart and soul of what we're about and what we're trying to do. So I just want to share with you a little bit of some of the principles that motivate us. I'm grateful that Mike brought me in to share some of that with all of you. Again, a lot of this is just really rooted out of our own personal experience. And my hope today is that hearing some of our approach, which we think is a little bit different than what else is going on out there in the world on this topic, you can find some things that you can apply to your own ministry and to your own work. Our mission is to create spaces to receive the whole person, grow systems of mutual support, and empower for mature Christian discipleship. So what do we mean by that? So receiving the whole person, just to be able within ourselves to say, okay, like this is my life, right? This is my body, this is my soul. These are our my unique strengths and weaknesses, but my family history, sorrows and joys, being unafraid to claim both our gifts, but also to be able to name our flaws. To grow systems of mutual support. We believe that if we accept and receive ourselves as whole people, we can do the same for others. And we think that that's how this meeting place with brothers and sisters happens. That's how we can start to move towards that joy of the wedding feast. And also to empower for mature Christian discipleship, right? Because when we're loved and challenged by God and by our communities, there's a freedom there. Right, when you're loved, there's freedom, and we can really lean into the work of redemption and transformation in our own lives. This isn't rocket science. This isn't theological acrobatics. And some of you might be thinking this isn't anything new. Well, praise God, right? What we're really trying to do is integrate the universal call to holiness into the particulars of this experience. We don't think we need to necessarily even reinvent the wheel. We don't need to create something that's entirely siloed from the rest of the church. But how do we, again, integrate this universal call to holiness into the particulars of this experience? I'm going to share some of the principles that we focus on, as well as some of the practical ways that we do that, and hopefully make some connections to you all as well. One of our core values is integrity. So to view things of the whole, that's the Latin etymology of the word integrity or integration. And so, when it comes to sexuality, we need to accept that this is a reality, right? This isn't a pray away sort of a situation here. But we also need to accept what Christ and the church teaches, right? To entrust ourselves into that mysterious will of the Father. That for whatever reason, this is what we're experiencing. And this is what Christ proclaims, what the church proclaims, what's written into our very bodies by God our Father. And how do we live in that? We have to live in that mystery, right? We have to live in that mystery with integrity. And so we really believe that any pastoral solution, whatever you're trying to do on your campuses, really needs to hold both of these concepts, right? To be able to provide a space where the reality of people's experiences can be acknowledged, not immediately like argued with or argued down. People can be listened to, but at the same time, also needing to provide clear pathways for growth in relationship with Christ and the surrender to mystery, the surrender to providence that entails, right? That discipleship entails. We also stand by a value of solidarity. I think in our day and age, there's plenty of sniping to go around. And yes, we might, offer some general critiques, but ultimately we really believe in seeing the good in other people, going as far as we can go together, even if we have some differences. And again, to kind of create that communal space where those conversations can be had, community can be fostered. There can be, again, this mutual accountability, and to be creative about that as well. Just kind of a quick thing. We're open to Christians of other denominations. We have a variety of different denominations who participate in what we do. And we're invested in building relationships in those spaces as well, building solidarity across denominational lines. There's a lot of good resources out there from Protestants on some of these topics too. Kind of an aside. And I think for our campuses, I think it's important to be asking ourselves, I'm sure our ministries look very different in what the programs are, what the culture is, the feel is within our Newman centers or our Catholic centers. But I think for all of us, right, it's important to ask ourselves, is my campus ministry a place where students take initiative in relationships with one another? Do they share vulnerably? Are they healthy with resolving conflict? Can people be honest about their wounds? Can they find support? Can they grow? That culture is really essential to helping people, right, that feel marginalized in other ways, to feel like they can be a part of our programs and what we're doing. We also value creativity, adventure. I think one of the big things for us is really fostering hope. I think that's really one of the unstated topics within this whole conversation around the intersectionality of LGBT experiences and the church. I think particularly when we live in a broader culture that exalts romantic relationships, we have a church that, especially for the last couple of decades, has really zeroed in on promoting marriage, priesthood, the religious life. For somebody who experiences same-sex desires, especially if they're like exclusive or predominant, persistent, it can really seem like there could be no compelling options, no sense of choice for how your life is going to end up. You're sort of resigned to, a house full of cats or something if you're going to stay in the church. An anecdote here. I remember when I was in youth ministry at the turn of the millennium, I remember hearing an argument from a priest that anybody who didn't end up married or in a permanent religious state had missed their vocation. I mean, now I'm like, okay, what did Dorothy Day miss her vocation? Did Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati like miss the calling God was placing on his life? I think as a church in general, I think we can really be embracing this value especially within our ministry to young adults, to exploring what are the ventures, what are the gifts that God might be calling you to give, regardless of sexuality. Another quick anecdote: I sat down to dinner once with like 4 young adults in their mid-20s, and I asked them about their life goals and dreams. And not one of them had a specific answer beyond like the next few months. Like they admitted they didn't really know what they wanted to do with their life, besides like eventually probably get married. They couldn't really name things they were really good at. And these are people that had gone through college campus ministry. These were dedicated Catholics, right? To ask yourself, is my ministry proactive in helping people learn more about their gifts and their charisms? You know, are opportunities offered for mentoring? You know, how many large group presentations or small group curriculums could be classified as, you know, human formation? And I think these questions are even more pressing if we expect people on the LGBT spectrum to remain in the church and to thrive here, to be able to say, okay, here's how we can explore the unique, unrepeatable ways that like God has made you. Let's explore some of your strengths. Let's explore some of your gifts, explore ways that the Holy Spirit is moving in you for a life of fulfillment. So practically though, these are a lot of ideas and principles. You know, I'm happy to share with you all that at least on our end, these principles are working. This is a map of locations where we've had people reach out to connect with our community so far. So, you know, if you're watching this from Iowa, Montana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Alaska, Hawaii, Tennessee, Maine, you know, you can tell your people we're here. We're not in all the states yet. But I'd like to share a little bit with you about what we actually do. Because I think, again, like there's a little bit difference in what we're doing than maybe some of the things that are out there. And hopefully I can make some connections for you all about things you could potentially try in your own ministry as well. I think one of the first key things that we do is offer a witness to hope. You know, if you look at our website, we definitely try to maintain a social media presence that reflects beauty, simple beauty, purpose. We're very intentional with what we post, the copy that we put on the website. We offer videos, but also personal testimony and speaking engagements. I spoke at the Focus Seek conference this past January, and it was crazy. I really can't tell you how many young people came up to me, how many college students, you know, came up to me, looked me in the eye and said, "You just said my life." I think it's incredibly important. People need to see themselves in the church. People need to be able to see themselves in the church. You know, I think within the secular LGBT community, a lot of the voices are LGBTQ persons. Most people speaking publicly on these topics within the church are heterosexual, at least as far as we know. Personal testimony is key. Personal testimony is key. Because if you don't see yourself in the church, then everybody's a pioneer, right? Everybody's kind of the risk taker stepping out. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know where to go. You don't know who is trying to live life the way you are. And we need that. All of us need that. No matter who we are, no matter what our experiences are, we need that. And we think that's one of the most important things we can do is just offer that witness to hope. You know, that said, I think as you encounter people within your own ministries who this is their experience, you know, even if they're like super gung-ho for Christ in the church, I think it's important as well to be careful not to tokenize people. You know, a personal testimony can be very valuable if there's somebody within your campus ministry that wants to share their story, you know, like praise God, like work with them on that. But I think it's also important to make sure we're not saying like, oh, this is your experience and you're trying to follow Jesus. Awesome. Like, let's get you in to speak. And you can offer this great presentation to give other people advice right away. This might not be something that somebody's ready for or something that somebody even wants to do. So be mindful of that. right? That in our desire to share stories, that we're making sure to just kind of be prudent in that within our ministries. Yeah, and so the programmatically, we have a few different ways that people can be received, people can connect with community, and can also grow and be empowered. So I wanted to share some of that with you all as well. So this is a little bit of our methodology. Kind of the first thing is receiving the person. So people can get in touch with us through social media and email, and anybody who reaches out, we offer to set up a call. If it's somebody close by, obviously coffee is ideal. Typically though, I mean, you guys saw the map, typically it's video calls. We really want to make it as personal as possible as we can, even over the internet, to really get to know people. You know, I think for those of us that feel maybe less experienced in this area, maybe it's intimidating to have a one-on-one conversation. I know I've definitely talked to some campus ministers who do feel intimidated, and they would kind of rather pass the buck, or it's like, oh, somebody mentioned this, but I don't really know what to say, so they can be here, but I'm not going to address it. I'm not going to get to know them as well. But we would not recommend that strategy, I guess. We would really recommend just having a human conversation, to focus on listening to that young person who shows up at your door, at your event, to ask basic questions, to get to know their stories and learn about their relationship with God, the dreams for their life, the same questions you would ask anybody else. As it's in getting to know that person, you're going to have a better sense of how to accompany them, how to walk with them, what their pain points are, what they're struggling with, what's going really well for them, right? We can kind of tailor our interactions to the human being, right? Rather than kind of this like out of the box response. So that's how we start. And then we always invite people into some kind of a community. So there's a lot of different ways that we do that. One of the ways that's been super popular, we book up every time, sometimes have to add new groups, is we do book clubs. So maybe you're wondering ways, maybe you have a group on campus already, or connected with your Newman Center, your Catholic Center that's doing something around sexuality. You're wondering some programming ideas. One of the things I just want to note about the way that we do these kind of small groups is we don't read like Dan Mattson or Father James Martin, like we don't read really a ton of really specific books about sexuality in general. We were reading C.S. Lewis's Four Loves. We're reading John Vanier. We read Community and Growth. We're reading Henry Nouwen. We're reading Carol Houselander. Coming together in solidarity around a shared experience, but exploring truths that both apply to our lives, but also transcend our shared experience. Our retreats, we have a backpacking trip actually coming up this summer. It's a similar mentality. We definitely confront certain questions head on, but we really don't limit our conversations to just sexuality. Our online community has threads on theology, politics, philosophy, literature, LGBT culture observations. There's a men's thread, there's a women's thread. We have some local groups that are starting to gather just to have dinner with one another and talk about how life went since they saw each other last month. And this, this can take some discernment. Obviously, there's a balance here, because people definitely want to talk about these questions of sexuality. I just mentioned like creating spaces to be able to talk about it. This is the reason they're showing up. But one of the things we've also found is that sometimes like those conversations can also get old. Once the group has been established, people have had the opportunity to kind of air these long dormant feelings. Then what? Where are you going? What are you doing? What's happening with your life? Offering some of these concrete, whole life, full life experiences. Maybe on campus that could look like a service project, reading a book together on discernment, a prayer night, things that put sexuality in the context of a person's entire life, which we think is part of the point. And also, actually, fun fact, part of the Catechism's definition of chastity. When the Catechism talks about the virtue of chastity, it's the integration of the sexuality within the person, the integration of sexuality within the person, the whole person. And then finally, we also, our work also involves an invitation to gift. So we are really committed to raising up a team from within the community. So part of our retreat team this past spring was people with this experience. Most of the book clubs are not led by myself or my co-founder now. They're being led by people who found us online and have been a part of what we do. We're really trying to encourage people in the development of their gifts. You know, a detail-oriented person is proofreading. Nobody proofread this slideshow though, so if you saw typos, my apologies. We've got people with advanced degrees in theology doing reviews of content, you know, people with experience in videography helping us dream up new video ideas. I mean, it's not just about like serving with us, but we really want to cultivate an environment that says, my life can be a gift. My life is a gift to others, to the world, back to God. And I think this loops around to one of the first things I said when we got started here today. People need to see themselves in the church. People also need to be able to speak for themselves. You know, don't get me wrong, I think everyone needs to be the recipient of pastoral care one way or another. That's all of us, you know, but no person is always and forever incapable of giving back, you know, incapable of coming to maturity and self-gift. We don't think that it just needs to be about them creating programs for us. But this is something we can do together. We can create a community of mutual generosity where people are giving of themselves, people are receiving. And I hope too that in your ministry you offer opportunities for growth and leadership as well. You know, I know with this topic, sometimes that can be a tension in some, you know, college campus ministries. And obviously you need to have particular standards of moral behavior for people in leadership. Absolutely. But I know that I've also encountered plenty of people who, not just in necessarily college campus ministry, but just in different areas of ministry, have, even though they're committed to the teachings of the church, you know, they're living, you know, chastely, they're celibate, all of that, but they're turned away from ministry positions simply because they admit that this is part of their experience. This is something that they feel, and on those grounds, people have said, "I'm sorry, I don't think you should be working in. I don't think you should lead a small group, or I don't think you should, you know, whatever it may be." You know, I think some of these attitudes can be problematic and can also lead to discouragement for people as well. You know, so how can we really be thinking creatively about ways to empower people for, again, mature Christian discipleship and for leadership, you know, as they're being called to by the Lord. So that's kind of what we do. That's a lot. I hope there's some things you can start thinking about for your own campus. We still have a lot of time here for questions as well. I'm just going to leave this up so you can kind of see how you can get in contact with us personally if you're interested, or if you have students who you know might want to be connected to what we do. This is our contact information. So I'll just leave that there and take some of your questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Anna. At this time, we can open up for questions. If a couple of options, you can either write your question into the chat box, send to me, the organizer, and I'll be glad to read it to Anna, or just send me a text as open up my microphone, and I'll be glad to do that. So let's take a moment, give folks a chance to write questions or send over a text. Okay, here's our first question. Anna, what is the common misconception about a young person with same-sex desires?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think one of the misconceptions is kind of a one size fits all approach. You know, I think if a young person comes into your campus ministry, and this is part of their experience, you know, maybe they have dating and sexual experience, maybe they don't. Maybe they've been out since they were 12. Maybe you're the first person they're telling. You know, I think we live in a really interesting time right now in the church, and in culture, where there's kind of this like collision of values. And so where people have come from, it's going to be very different. And so I think to recognize that this isn't what someone's story is, what someone's past is, where they're at now with admitting this experience to themselves, what they've done or not done. This is, we can't make any assumptions. And that's why I really emphasizing being able to listen to people to kind of get a feel for where they're at as an individual.
Okay, very good. Another question. This one here is from Janet. What is your approach to working with bishops who come from a more traditional mindset?
You know, we are still a pretty young organization, and so we have at this point we're still kind of growing in our interactions with different bishops. You know, have a lot of respect for the office, the Episcopal office. You know, and I would just be happy to share what we do and why. You know, because I think we align doctrinally, and yeah, you know, that there's a doctrinal alignment that we have with the magisterium, and we're just, you know, kind of trying to be creative in how we respond to our current cultural climate. And I'd love to share that at any opportunity.
Okay, University of Dayton, appreciate the encounter we have with Christ, and Anna indicated that this woundedness probably comes from folks' same-sex attraction desires. However, many folks indicate that these wounds come from cultural or religious responses to them for their sexual identity.
Yeah. So just kind of a quick disclaimer. When I was talking about woundedness there, I was, you know, talking more about um, not sexuality specific. I mean, to be honest, like Lord knows, I have plenty of wounds that have nothing to do with my attraction to women. Like I have plenty of wounds that I have accumulated over the years. So I was talking about it in the most general sense. And so I would absolutely agree with this individual, that yeah, like there's definitely an experience, at least, you know, in my own life of like an ache, and a longing, a hurt that sometimes I experience around this topic. But we can be hurt as well, you know, by individual people, and that can inflict wounds upon us as well. So, you know, absolutely, like the ways that we experience those aches, those hurts, those wounds, they can come from all over the place.
Okay, very good. Question: should we discourage young people from using typical LGBT language, i.e., coming out, rather than finding identity in Christ?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation around, you know, these topics today, um, and you know, I think in some ways, generationally, I'm just going to speak generationally, particularly with Generation Z coming through. In some ways, and in my personal opinion, I think some of the term ship has sailed. Some of them are using labels. Some of them don't want to be labeled. You know, there's whole campaigns right now within the LGBTQ community of like, you know, love has no label. Like they don't even want the words to begin with. You know, and so I guess my first focus, my first encouragement would be I wouldn't necessarily pick language as the first intense conversation I was going to have with a person. Like I'd be much more concerned with, you know, why are you using that word? How do you see that word? Why did you pick that word to describe what you're experiencing? Because you might find that some young people are using it more as an adjective, than as a noun, so to speak. And so I think listening to why people are using particular words is key. Yeah, I think that's really, really the key point here.
All right. And Ben says, thanks, Anna. On the Catholic campus where he works, I worry about being labeled a bigot because I don't automatically celebrate gay marriage and want to think with the church on this. Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the church's, the way that we view marriage within the context of, salvation history and in the intentionality of God is very different in many ways from what's currently happening with marriage today in our culture. And so this is, one manifestation of that. And I don't think, praise God, we live in a country where there is that openness and freedom of expression. And I don't think it's inappropriate to be able to share that with someone, articulate that to someone. I don't know the exact context, if this person was invited to a wedding and had to say no, or if this is just a question they get on a daily basis. But I think if we're expecting tolerance, if other people are expecting tolerance from us, they should be tolerant of us too, and our desire to, in the words of the question asker, think with the mind of the church. I guess if I knew the more specific situation, I might have a more specific response.
Okay, let's see. I appreciate fostering hope, and what's my yes in quotes, but many folks get stuck with the big no from the church, especially around what the person has discerned as their call to be in a lifetime relationship. It's more a statement than a question.
Yes. What is the question there?
Yeah.
I would agree. I think a lot of people, I think that is a tension point. That's a challenge.
Okay, so if you want to follow that up, just let me know and I'll be glad to open up your microphone. And then Monica says, thank you, Anna, for your testimony. What do you think about other initiatives like Courage?
I have a lot of respect, particularly, for any organization that is, thinking with the mind of the church, is in union with the magisterium. And I think it's great that we live in a church where there's a lot of different charisms at play. I think there's areas that they focus in that we don't have the bandwidth, to focus in. Their local chapters, for example. I have a lot of, I think there's different areas that we focus on, and I have a lot of respect for what they do.
All righty. And let's see, Mike asks, the question is, Father Mike Schmidt's book on homosexuality one that you would recommend as a useful resource?
I would recommend it for you. I think it's a good book in articulating why the church teaches what it does. I think it's one of the better books in giving kind of a more robust explanation for why the church says no. I think he shared publicly about some of his own family encounters with this, and so I think he definitely has a pastoral heart in this area. However, depending on where a student was at, maybe if they understood all of that already, it wouldn't necessarily tell them something they didn't already know.
Okay.
So if someone's wondering what the big context of why the church teaches this, that would be a great book for that.
So Anna, as you called, University of Dayton had that question, and then they followed it up. But I think I'm going to ask if I can just open up their microphone. It might be clearer for them to ask direct.
Sure.
You, Dayton, you're on.
Hi, Dayton.
They might be muted themselves.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, great.
Good. I think I loved you talked about the two different ways of problem solving versus personal relationships, and we're married, we're all about like saying yes. That's really important to us. But I think that my experience with folks I identify in the queer community is that there's still that big no they get stuck at. With they feel they understand the church's teaching, but in their heart and in their prayer life and their relationship with the Lord, they feel like they're called to a lifetime relationship with someone of the same gender. And so for them, like that is a process that they continue with, but they're not welcome at the table. And so how do we work with people and say, no, you are welcome at the table? Or do we say, no, you're really not really still welcome at the table?
Sure. I think I think within our with something, for example, we might encourage with the invitation, right? The reality is we're all called to lifetime relationships with people of the same gender. And I don't say that lightly, again, as somebody with this experience. I really don't say that lightly, and I don't mean to make light of the desire for exclusive union. But I think that the question, a lot of it is context and what, the question of it is context. I think as a church, I think we need to be doing a better job of fostering real friendship that's going in the trenches with each other, that's really intimate about what's going on, that's very present to one another, and very real and committed. For me, in a particular way, I find that with a family, my best friend and her family, that's very, they know everything, and we're in the trenches in life together. And I really know, like, they've got me. Like, I need an emergency contact, like, they can be called. And so I think we need to be doing a better job of fostering those sorts of relationships. And as well, I think helping people to really encounter Christ in a really deep way. Because I think the truth is we all are looking for love. I'm a TOB person, the spousal orientation, the spousal meaning of the body. And all of us, no matter who we are as well, no matter what, like, vocation, big V, as we sometimes say, we're called to, that inclination still needs to be there with Christ. And if that is not the first and foremost love of our lives, especially for those of us with this experience, like, of course, there's other avenues that are far more appealing. And I don't say that to put down what these students' relationships with Christ are like. Please don't interpret it that way. That's not my intention. But I think we need to make sure, first of all, as a church, that we're creating spaces that are cultivating deep relationship with Christ and real friendships that are consistent and deep and intimate and real, to help be supporting people. And obviously, people, they're processing through what it is that they're processing through,
No, I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think that there is. You're naming this tension that we have, and I don't actually think that it can be resolved in a half an hour. But
probably not.
I do think. What you're talking about is, like, we need to support the vocation of living a single life, and that is different than someone discerns that they're not called to the single life, but they're called to be in a lifetime partnership with someone in the same sex. I know it's kind of splitting hairs, but if someone came to the church and said, hey, you know what, I identify with SSA, but my best friend who's female, and, like, we're gonna, like, live together because, like, we have a really deep, intimate relationship, but we're not having sex, we're all good about that. Like, there's still gonna be
right. Okay. I'm sorry. I was misunderstanding some of your question earlier. There is a school of thought that's emerging, primarily, I think, in different Protestant circles, but we're seeing it a little bit within the Catholic spaces as well, this concept of, like, a celibate partnership. I didn't realize that's what you're referring to. That is definitely kind of an emerging question that I would love to watch play out practically before I gave a real concrete endorsement or a de facto naysay either,
Well, I think that's not the direction I was actually trying to go in. I'm just saying that there's still that tension, that it's still a difference between someone that feels and discerned a call to a lifetime relationship versus a call to single life, and that we need to have support for people called to the single life. But that's anyone, whether you're straight or you're queer or however you identify, and there's a place for you there. But where there's not a place is if you don't fit into that category. So like, if someone's going through stuff and we want to keep them at the table, how do we keep them at the table? If they're discerned or they're in the discerning process, I think that's the tension. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, because I think it is a very complicated situation.
Sure. I think it's also, I don't know, I think some of it depends on the table that we're talking about here as well. Obviously, if we're talking about, persons that are in a state of mortal sin for whatever reason, the Eucharistic table is sacred, and we need to really, I think, be in union with the age-old tradition of the church on that. Now, being in relationship, sharing a meal together, right? I mean, we can also talk, I think, about the literal, the dinner table, right? We see the example of Christ, who that's his MO, is eating with people, breaking bread with people who didn't quite fit into larger Jewish society. And that's the example that Jesus gives us, is to be in relationship. And to not be afraid of some of those differences. That would be my take in the time that we have.
Thank you so much. I'll let somebody else talk now. I don't want to take the whole time. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. All right. Any other questions? That was the last one I believe I had on the chat box. Just give it another moment, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, seeing no other questions, Anna, once again, thank you on behalf of CCMA for sharing so much of not only the Eden invitation as well as your own life. And we really appreciate you taking the time. We thank all of you who have joined us here, and remind you that next month, June, we have our next and final webinar of the year, I believe. And Mike, do you have anything you want to wrap up with?
Thanks, Deacon Frank. Nothing other than thank you to everybody. Thank you for being on today. Anna, we're really, really grateful. This is a difficult topic, and I feel like you've taken the edge off of it for all of us. So thank you. And to everybody who's listened during the year and participated. It's been really our best year for webinars. And I think it's because of the good back and forth that we've had, the honest conversation. And so it makes you all professionals. And I'm just really grateful. So Deacon Frank, we're grateful to you for doing all the hard work behind the scenes. So thank you, everybody.
All right, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you again, or we'll talk to you again in June. Take care. Thank you, Anna. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.